All right, so welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today, we are exploring, personality types, right? Using the DISC model.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone listening can think about, like, that friend that's always in charge,
Yeah.
or the one who, like, just never seems to sweat the small stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember, like DISC, it's not about like putting people in boxes, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's more about just like understanding these behavioral patterns that make us tick, right? And DISC gives us a framework to do that.
For sure. So DISC it categorizes people into like four main types. We got the dominant, the influential, steady, and conscientious. And we've got some really good sources for today's deep dive. So we've got Surrounded by Idiots, which that one really kind of gets into the like nitty gritty of each DISC type.
Right.
And then we've also got some insights from personality-quizzes.com. And actually, just as a little aside, you can actually take a DISC assessment on that website.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, there's a free version if you just kind of want to get like a basic overview. But if you want to like splurge and get the super detailed report, it's only $14.
Wow. Well, that's not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all. Right.
So I think one of the interesting things that Surrounded by Idiots does is like they actually use colors to represent the different DISC types,
Okay.
which makes it like a little bit easier to visualize, like, kind of remember.
Gotcha.
Like dominant is red, influential is yellow, steady is green, and conscientious is blue.
Oh.
Yeah.
So that's why I always like picture a bulldozer when I think about like dominant personality types.
Exactly.
It all makes sense.
Yeah,
now.
like think of those like, red CEOs, right?
Yeah.
Who just like plow through obstacles to get things done. Like the book actually has this this hilarious story about a red CEO. Basically, he ran over everyone in the company soccer tournament.
Oh my gosh.
It was a little extreme, but
That is extreme.
but it's a good way to like, kind of highlight their competitive nature
Yeah, for sure.
and their drive to win,
But okay, but like what happens if that CEO like keeps steamrolling over like their team though?
Right.
Like doesn't that kind of like backfire in the long run?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Dominant types, they can be incredibly effective leaders, right?
Yeah.
But like you're saying, their drive can also like lead them to be overly assertive or even like domineering if they're not careful.
Yeah.
It's all about like balance.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
not just about like identifying the types, but like really understanding their strengths and weaknesses.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So now moving on to the influential types, like think the yellows, right? So Surrounded by Idiots really kind of paints them as like the life of the party, always optimistic and just super persuasive,
Yeah.
There's this one anecdote about a yellow person who gets in a car accident and somehow manages to like spin it into a positive
Oh, why?
experience,
Okay, so they're like the eternal optimists, right?
Yeah.
They can always find the silver lining.
Exactly. Like they can light up a room like with their energy,
Yeah.
And they're just like amazing at motivating others, like
Yeah.
think of those friends,
Yeah.
who can like convince you to do anything. They probably have a strong like I in their DISC profile.
Which, I mean, that can be awesome when you need like a boost, right?
Right.
But I imagine it could also get like exhausting if they're like constantly like on, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you're right. It's about recognizing like, while those qualities are strength,
Yeah.
they can like they can also become like overwhelming for others if they're not, managed well.
Totally. Yeah.
It's all about balance.
It's just like, I'm already like thinking of people in my head, Yeah.
And how their like DISC type might like explain certain behaviors.
Right. And that's what's so cool about DISC, right? Like it gives you, it's like a lens
Yeah.
for understanding not just yourself, but also like the people you interact with every single day.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. So now let's move on to the steady types. So think like, the greens,
Okay.
like calm, patient, cooperative.
Gotcha.
The book like describes them as the reliable rocks of a team, really emphasizing their like preference for like stability, and they like don't like sudden change.
Okay, so they're like the ones you want in your corner when things get like tough, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like they're like the glue
Yeah.
that holds everything together. And there's this one example in the book about about like a green person and they're like meticulously renovating their house.
Like,
Right.
taking their time to get everything just right.
Right.
They just value peace and harmony, and they're like always willing to lend a helping hand.
Yeah. I can already see how, like, knowing that someone's a steady type could help you, like, avoid misunderstandings.
Right.
Like, bombarding them with, like, last-minute changes is probably not the best
Yeah.
approach.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It's about adapting, your
Yeah.
approach to match their style.
For sure. For sure. Okay, and then we get to, like, the last type, which is conscientious or C.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So think of them as like the detail-oriented perfectionists of the group.
Gotcha.
They just crave like accuracy, precision, quality in everything that they do.
Mhm.
And Surrounded by Idiots offers this like amusing anecdote about a blue person. And they basically like double check every Excel formula with a calculator
Oh, my God.
just to be absolutely sure.
Wow. I mean, like, while that sounds a little extreme,
Yeah.
I can definitely see how that, like, attention to detail could be, like, invaluable in certain roles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like conscientious types, they're your go-to people, right?
Yeah.
For tasks that require like meticulousness and like careful planning. They're the ones who will like spot the errors that everyone else misses.
Right. Yeah. But wouldn't that, like, attention to detail, like, also make them, like, more resistant to, like, change or risk-taking, though?
Yeah, that is a valid point. Their desire for like perfection can sometimes lead to like analysis paralysis or like a reluctance to, step outside their comfort zone.
Right.
But like understanding this about them, right?
Yeah.
It allows you to like approach situations with like, a bit more sensitivity and patience.
Totally. Oh, my gosh. This is really making me think about, like, how differently each disc type, like, approaches the world,
Yeah, and that's the beauty of DISC, right?
Yeah.
It helps us understand that like there's no right or wrong personality type,
Yeah.
It's just different ways of like perceiving and interacting with the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay. So, like, now that we've kind of, like, laid out these four, like, disc types,
Mm-hmm.
like, where do we go from here? Like, how do we actually, like, use this knowledge to improve, like, our interactions,
Well, that's where the platinum rule comes in. It's taking like what we've learned about like the individual types, right?
Yeah.
And applying it to like team dynamic.
Okay, gotcha. So, like, for example, we know that, like, a dominant type, like, they might, like, charge ahead with, like, bold ideas,
Yeah.
while a steady type might be more focused on, like, keeping everyone on the same page,
Right.
So, like, how do we make sure these, like, different styles, like, work together effectively,
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's what we're going to get into next, like really understanding how these personalities interact and like potentially clash, right?
Yeah.
Within a team setting can help us create like, a more harmonious and like productive environment.
Okay, this is getting really interesting. I'm eager to, like, hear more about, like, how to apply these insights to, like, teamwork and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so we've talked about like the 4 disc types as individuals, right? But I think it'd be cool to kind of like zoom out a little bit
Okay,
and
sure.
see how this like plays out in teams,
Right, because, like, I mean, in the real world, it's pretty rare that we only have to deal with, like, one personality type at a time.
Exactly. And that's really where the platinum rule shines, Like
Okay.
it really emphasizes that like different disc combinations can either create synergy or
Yeah.
lead to some serious friction.
Gotcha. Okay, so like, let's say you've got a team, right?
Yeah.
And it's got a mix of, like, dominant and steady types.
Right.
What are some of the potential, like, challenges that might come up? And, like, how can you use DISC to kind of, like, navigate those?
Yeah, well, I mean, as we discussed, like dominant types are all about like action and results, right?
Uh-huh.
Whereas steady types, they really value stability and harmony.
Yeah.
So you can imagine like how clashes might arise, right?
Yeah.
If the dominant type is like pushing for rapid change and the steady type is kind of like digging in their heels, resistant to disrupting the status quo.
Totally. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
almost like they're speaking different languages.
That's a great way to put it. And that's where understanding DISC becomes so valuable, right?
Yeah.
Instead of seeing it as like a personality clash, you can actually recognize it as like a difference in communication styles.
Right.
and adjust accordingly.
So, okay. So like how would you kind of like bridge that gap, right?
Right.
Between like a dominant and a steady type in that like team setting.
Yeah, I mean, communication is key, right? Like, the
Yeah.
dominant type needs to understand that the steady type's resistance, like, it isn't personal.
Uh-huh.
It's just about, like, their need for security and predictability.
Okay.
So instead of just, like, bulldozing through with their ideas,
Yeah.
they need to take the time to actually explain the rationale behind the changes and reassure the steady type that, like, their concerns are being heard.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
And then like how should the steady type, like how should they kind of approach the situation?
Yeah, so they need to be, like, upfront about their need for, like, clear communication
Yeah.
and a sense of stability. So instead of just, like, passively resisting, they should actually, like, actively engage in the discussion,
Okay.
asking questions and expressing their concerns in a constructive way.
So it's really about finding that like balance between like respecting each other's styles, right?
Mhm.
And then like working together towards that common goal.
Absolutely. And that's really the essence of like the platinum rule.
Yeah.
It's not about, like, changing who you are. It's about, like, recognizing that different people have different needs
Right.
and adapting your communication style accordingly.
This is like, I'm thinking back to some like team projects I've been on where like things just went off the rails, and I can totally see, like looking back, I can totally see how like understanding DISC could have like helped us avoid like those communication breakdowns.
Yeah, it's a really common experience. We often kind of attribute these conflicts to just, like, personality clashes, when in reality it's often just a matter of, like, different DISC types not understanding how to communicate effectively with each other.
Okay, so we've covered the individual DISC types, right?
Right.
We've touched on like team dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Is there